You are not as free as you think. Most people never notice the moment their mind is altered. There is no warning, no resistance, no alarm. The thought doesn't feel foreign, it feels earned. That's how real manipulation works. It doesn't command, it conditions, it doesn't argue. It frames reality until only one conclusion feels reasonable. Your fears, your desires, your moral certainty, many of them were installed quietly through repetition, tone, and emotional pressure. You weren't convinced, you were shaped. And the most disturbing part? The sharper your intellect, the more elegant the cage becomes. Because intelligence doesn't prevent control. It rationalizes it. It builds explanations for walls it never realized were there. This audiobook is not about learning how to manipulate others. It's about recognizing the forces already manipulating you. In relationships, media, authority, love, guilt, loyalty, and identity. Once these mechanisms become visible, comfort disappears. Certainty erodes, and innocence does not return. But blindness is far more expensive. So listen carefully. Stay with this audiobook until the end, and if this already feels uncomfortable, that's a sign. Subscribe to this channel, because awareness fades when exposure stops. Like this video so it reaches others, still inside the illusion. Share it with someone who needs to see what they can't yet name. And comment below, what was the first belief you ever realized wasn't truly yours? If you're ready, let's begin. Chapter 1. The Architecture of the Human Mind. You are not who you think you are. You are instead a careful and ongoing negotiation between two entities sharing the same skull. The first is the one you recognize. The conscious self, the narrator, the I that believes it sits in a well-lit command center, evaluating data, making choices, steering the ship. It is articulate, rational, and proudly aware. It is also a guest in its own house, arriving late to every decision, tasked primarily with constructing a coherent story for events already set in motion. Beneath this curated suite of consciousness lies the foundation, vast, dark, and humming with silent activity. This is the subconscious, the furnace room of the self, where raw data of experience, every flicker of light, every micro-expression on a stranger's face, every scent attached to a memory of fear, is processed, sorted, and stored. It operates not on logic, but on patterns. Not on words, but on sensations. Its currency is not truth, but survival. And it is always, always listening. The conscious mind deliberates, the subconscious mind reacts. And in the gap between reaction and deliberation, the architecture of influence is built. Consider a simple universal experience, trust. Your conscious mind has a list of criteria for trusting someone, their credentials, their reliability, their past actions. But long before you consult that list, your subconscious has already cast its vote. It reads the dilation of a pupil, the subtle mirroring of posture, the timbre of a voice that echoes a comforting sound from your past. It weighs these metrics in a millisecond and delivers its verdict to your conscious awareness, not as data, but as feeling. A gut instinct, a sense of ease or a prickle of unease. You then, the conscious narrator, scramble to rationalize this preordained emotion. You attribute your trust to their firm handshake, your distrust to a vibe. You are writing the press release for a treaty already signed in the dark. This is the fundamental vulnerability, the emotional override. Logic is a slender reed in the face of a storm surge from the depths. A carefully framed image of loss can make a cautious person reckless. A whisper of tribal belonging can make a moral person cruel. A well-tapped reservoir of nostalgia can make a skeptical person sentimental. The trigger is not a logical argument. It is a key that fits a pre-existing, often hidden lock. The lock might be a primal fear of exclusion, a deep-seated yearning for authority, a childhood wound around scarcity. When the key turns, the iron gates of reason swing open, and the army of emotion marches through unchallenged. The conscious mind is left to follow behind, drafting explanations for the conquest, believing it authorized the invasion. To navigate an impossibly complex world, this subconscious system employs scribes and sentries. Cognitive shortcuts. These are not flaws but features, necessary heuristics that allow you to cross the street without calculating the physics of every moving vehicle. Yet each shortcut carves a blind spot into your perception. There is the shortcut of resonance, where an idea feels true not because of evidence, but because it echoes something you already believe, creating a hall of mirrors where your own voice comes back to you, disguised as revelation. There is the shortcut of the available story, where the most recent, vivid or emotionally charged narrative dominates your judgment of probability, making the rare event seen in a newsfeed feel like an imminent threat. There is the shortcut of the label, where a single word or category, elitist, patriot, visionary, summons a pre-packaged constellation of judgments, saving you the labor of thought while imprisoning the subject in a definition they did not choose. These blind spots are not absences of light. They are shadows cast by the very structures that allow you to function, and influence works not by flooding the mind with light, but by artfully aligning its propositions with these existing shadows, so they appear as natural extensions of the landscape. Think of your mind as an ancient city, built atop its own ruins. The conscious self walks the orderly modern streets, but beneath the pavement lie older pathways, catacombs of instinct and emotion, forgotten crypts of past trauma and desire. The master influencer is an archaeologist of these ruins. They do not need to force a new road into the city. They simply discover which old subterranean passage leads to the throne room, and then they tap on the walls from below. The ruler above hears the sound, feels a vague disquiet, and issues an order they believe is their own, merely to quiet the unexplained noise. This is the quiet menace of the architecture. You are both the inhabitant and the artifact. You are living in a psychological structure where the blueprints are half lost. The wiring is exposed in places, and the foundation settles according to pressures applied long ago. To be human is to trust this structure implicitly, to feel its walls as the boundaries of reality itself. So when an influence succeeds, it feels less like persuasion and more like recognition, a truth you'd somehow forgotten, a desire you'd misplaced. The skillful manipulator does not argue with the architect in the lighted suite. They speak to the ghost in the basement, in a language of echoes and sighs. They understand that to change a person's mind, you must first speak to the shadows that their mind casts. The unsettling realization, then, is not that others might exploit this architecture. It is that you are and always have been living in it. Your strongest convictions, your deepest fears, your most spontaneous likings. How many were truly built by the deliberate hand of your conscious reason? And how many were simply unearthed from the soil already formed by the plow of circumstance? You look out from the command center, confident in your view, but the windows were placed by another builder, in another century, for another purpose. The landscape you see is the only one you can ever see, and the true map of your territory is drawn on a parchment you keep in a locked room, in a script you have never been taught to read. Chapter 2. Why People Are Easily Controlled. It begins with a stare in a crowded room, not a hostile one. A simple, unwavering gaze held a fraction of a second too long from a stranger across a party. You feel it before you understand it. A slight tightening of the skin, a microscopic recalibration of your posture. Your laughter becomes a half-tone quieter. You smooth your sleeve. A part of you, ancient and vigilant, has come online. It is not assessing threat, it is assessing position. This is the bedrock. The human animal is a social animal, and its first law is not survival of the fittest, but survival of the most integrated. To be cast out was, once, a death sentence. That echo never faded. It simply learned to wear modern clothes. We are not controlled despite our intelligence, but because of our deepest needs. Control is not a cage imposed from without. It is a current we agree to swim in, because the alternative is to be left alone, adrift in a silent sea. The mechanisms of influence are not tools that break the will. They are keys that fit pre-existing locks. Locks forged by fear, polished by desire, and installed by the silent, relentless engine of our need to belong. Consider fear not as a monster, but as a cartographer. It does not merely terrify, it remaps. When activated, it shrinks the world to a single narrow corridor. All other doors, those labeled reason, patience, compassion, future consequence, seem to vanish from the perceptual field. Only one path remains illuminated, the path away from the immediate threat. A skilled influencer does not create the fear. They merely become the one who holds the only map, who points to the single visible door and says, with calm authority, this way. The controlled person does not feel led, they feel rescued. Their compliance is the price of the map, and they pay it willingly, grateful for the guidance. Desire operates on the same axis, but in the opposite direction. It is the cartography of lack. It whispers of a territory just beyond reach, a version of yourself that is more complete, more admired, more real. This ache, this sense of being almost there, is a vulnerability of exquisite precision. Influence here involves simply positioning oneself as the gatekeeper to that promised land. The gate need not ever open. In fact, the control is more potent if it remains slightly ajar. The pursuit becomes the purpose. The hunger is more reliable than the feast. And between these two poles, the fear of loss and the desire for gain, lies the fertile valley of insecurity. Insecurity is the chronic doubt that one's social map is accurate, that one's expressions are wrong, that one's very essence is somehow incorrect. This is not a weakness of character. It is the inevitable byproduct of a consciousness that can see itself through the imagined eyes of others. We are born into a play already in progress, handed a script we must decipher, and we are never quite sure we've found the right lines. We watch the others, the ones who seem to move with assurance, and we mimic their cadence, their gestures, their opinions. This mimicry is not deceit. It is a search for the correct form. It is obedience to an unseen director. This is the power of social conditioning. It makes the artificial feel innate. The rules of the tribe, what to value, what to despise, how to succeed, what success even means, are absorbed not through lessons but through osmosis. They become the gravity of your world. You do not feel their pull, you simply accept that down is down. To question the gravity is not an act of rebellion, but of existential disorientation. It feels less like thinking and more like madness. So when influence aligns with this gravity, it requires no force. It is a gentle nudge downhill. The person tumbles into agreement, their own momentum mistaken for agency. The ultimate leverage, however, is the mirror. The human need for approval and belonging is a need for a coherent, positive reflection of the self. We look to others to tell us who we are. Their smiles confirm our worth. Their frowns threaten to dissolve our edges. The influencer who understands this does not offer love or friendship. They offer validation. They become a highly selective mirror, reflecting back only the parts of you that align with their design, while letting the other parts fall into shadow. You begin to lean into the reflection. You emphasize the traits that earn the approving glow. The undesirable traits, unseen and unreflected, begin to feel less real, less you. You are not being hollowed out. You are being sculpted by your own hand, guided by the angle of the glass they hold. You can see it everywhere once you know the shape. In the workplace, where the unspoken promise of belonging to the inner circle justifies 100 small compromises. In families where the withdrawal of emotional warmth silences dissent more effectively than any shout. In cultures where the fear of being labeled an outsider, awkward, difficult, not a team player, ensures a smooth, unthinking conformity. The leash is not made of steel, it is made of glances. The cage is not locked. It is held shut by the sheer, terrifying weight of the silence on the other side of the bars. Is this weakness? Perhaps. But to call it weakness is to misunderstand the architecture. These needs, for safety, for meaning, for connection, are the pillars that hold up the human psyche. They are what make us capable of love, community, and sacrifice. They are the source of our greatest strengths. And like all foundations, they can bear immense weight. They can also be used as anchor points for chains. The quiet, unsettling realization is this: the potential for control is not a foreign implant. It is woven into the very fabric of human relationship. It lives in the space between what we fear and what we crave, in our lifelong conversation with the tribe. To be human is to hold these levers within yourself and to present their handles every day to the world around you. The question is not who will seize them. The question, the one that lingers in the silence after the crowd's applause has faded, is what you have already agreed to just to hear the sound. Chapter 3. The Ethics Illusion. No one decides to become the villain of their own story. The transformation is quieter than that. It begins not with a leap across a moral boundary, but with a slow, almost imperceptible erosion of the ground upon which that boundary is drawn. A single step justified by necessity, taken on a path that gradually curves away from the sun. By the time the landscape has grown dark, the eyes have long since adjusted. This is not hypocrisy. It is something far more psychologically elegant. The construction of a parallel conscience, one that allows the self to remain intact, even admired, while its actions traverse shadow. The manipulator rarely sees a manipulator in the mirror. They see a strategist, a realist, a protector, perhaps even a savior. The machinery of influence is not powered by a rejection of ethics, but by its meticulous recalibration. Morality does not vanish. It is simply edited word by silent word until it endorses what it was meant to forbid. The primary tool in this edit is moral disengagement, a process of psychological alchemy that transmutes leaden harm into golden necessity. It is not a switch thrown, but a dial turned, degree by careful degree. First, the language changes. Actions are not framed, even internally, by their effect on others, but by their higher purpose. Influence becomes guidance, pressure becomes encouragement, exploitation becomes leverage. The words form a clean, clinical shell around the messy human consequences, sterilizing the act. The focus shifts from the person being acted upon to the beautiful outcome, the necessary result. The end begins to justify not just the means, but the lexicon. Then comes the diffusion of agency. The individual action is submerged in the larger current. This is just how the game is played. The system makes it necessary. Anyone in my position would do the same. The actor becomes a node in a network, a hand moved by larger forces, market pressures, competitive landscapes, tribal survival. Responsibility is not rejected. It is distributed so finely it becomes a mist, impossible to grasp. One is not steering the ship, but merely riding a wave. To blame the rider for the direction of the tide seems, from the inside, profoundly unfair. The most potent disengagement, however, involves the subtle alteration of the target's humanity. This is not the cartoonish hatred of an enemy. It is a far quieter, more bureaucratic process. The subject is gradually recategorized in the mental ledger. They become a demographic, a risk factor, a bottleneck, a client. Their complexities, their hopes, their inner world, the very things that would invoke empathy, are gently filed away as irrelevant data. They are not dehumanized through cruelty, but through categorization. A chess player does not hate the pawn. They simply understand its function within the game. When you are optimizing a system, individual suffering is not malice. It is collateral, a regrettable but inevitable integer in a larger equation. Beneath these techniques lies the silent engine, the psychology of domination. It is rarely about cruelty for its own sake. It is about the transcendence of uncertainty. To influence another's mind without their knowledge is to achieve a sublime, godlike certainty. It is to escape the terrifying chaos of human negotiation, the vulnerability of asking, the risk of hearing no. It replaces the messy democracy of two wills with the clean efficiency of a single, unfolding design. Power in this form is not felt as aggression. It is felt as relief. The quiet hum of control is the sound of anxiety silenced. The manipulator, often fleeing a deep-seated sense of powerlessness themselves, builds a private universe where variables can be managed, outcomes predicted, and the terrifying autonomy of others is rendered inert. Their influence is a fortress against chaos. Every successful, unseen directive is a stone added to its wall. Witness the architecture of this justification. The parent who says, "I'm only doing this because I love you," as they install surveillance. The executive who speaks of hard decisions for the health of the company while erasing livelihoods. The partner who whispers, "I just get so worried about you," as they methodically sever outside connections. In each, a kernel of truth is weaponized. Love, responsibility, concern. These authentic ethics are not discarded, they are hollowed out and used as vessels for control. The conscience is not bypassed. It is co-opted. It stands guard at the door of the self, holding a portrait of a noble protector, while inside the furniture of another's free will is quietly rearranged. This is the true illusion, the belief that malevolence must be conscious, that the puppeteer knows they hold strings. But what if the most effective control flows from a profound, unshakable conviction in one's own righteousness? The hand on the lever believes it is pulling the switch to keep the lights on for everyone. It does not feel the darkening of the room behind it. So the question shifts. It is no longer merely about identifying the manipulator. It is about recognizing the conditions under which any conscience, perhaps even your own, might begin its silent, rational slide. The language of justification, the diffusion of blame, the comforting categorization of others, these are not monstrous anomalies. They are psychological processes available to anyone under the right, or rather the wrong set of pressures. The unsettling realization is that the capacity for this ethical sleepwalking resides within the very structures that make us moral creatures. Our need for purpose, our desire for order, our profound fear of chaos. The same faculties that allow us to build principles can, with a few subtle edits, be used to draft the exceptions. The boundary between shepherd and butcher is not a wall. It is a series of doors, each labeled for the greater good. And each one, once passed through, locks quietly behind you. And by the time you turn to look back, the path you took no longer looks like a series of choices. It looks like the only road that was ever there. Chapter 4. Psychological hooks. The most powerful chains are not felt as restraint. They are felt as rhythm. Think of the last time you hurried for no reason. A flash sale ending at midnight. A limited availability alert blinking on a screen. A raised eyebrow in a meeting implying a decision must be made now, before the moment is lost. You felt a subtle internal click, a gear engaging deep within the machinery of choice. Your pace quickened, your thinking narrowed, the world reduced to a simple binary. Act now or lose forever. This is not mere persuasion. It is the engineering of a moment, the careful application of a force, the potential loss of an opportunity. Registers with a sharper, more urgent voltage than the potential benefit of acquiring it. Influence, therefore, is not about highlighting the value of the thing itself. It is about artfully illuminating the void that will be left in its absence. The countdown clock, the last chance, the exclusive circle, these are not features of an offer. They are psychological tripwires. Once sprung, they bypass the deliberative mind and summon the hoarder, the survivor, the child who fears being left out. You are no longer choosing. You are averting a loss you only just learned was possible. This manufactured urgency creates a silent, pressurized chamber. Within it, logic gasps for air. There is no time for cross-referencing, for second opinions, for the quiet voice of doubt to form a complete sentence. The pressure itself becomes the reason. I had to decide. The hook is not in the offer, but in the closing of the window. Then there is the hook of the quieted room. It is the peculiar stillness that falls not when a shout begins, but when a certain person enters the conversation. Their title, their bearing, their uniform, or simply the deferential tone others use around them. This is the aura of authority. It does not demand belief. It preempts the need for it. The human mind, overwhelmed by complexity, is wired with a simple heuristic: defer to the perceived expert. It is an efficient shortcut, but a shortcut by design bypasses the scenic route of verification. True authority is earned, Perceived authority, however, can be constructed. It is built from symbols, from rituals of deference, from the confident, unhesitating tone that suggests a direct line to truth. The hook here is the surrender of your own judgment, not through force, but through a whispered societal suggestion. This person knows better. To question them is not just disagreement. It feels like arrogance, a violation of a natural order. Your own knowledge shrinks in the shadow of their presumed certainty. You hand over the keys to your own discernment, relieved of the burden of having to navigate alone. But perhaps the most insidious hook is the one you baited yourself. It begins small, almost insignificantly. A modest agreement, a tiny commitment, a public nod of assent. You have taken a position, however minor. The hook is set. This is the trap of consistency. The human psyche has a profound, almost compulsive desire to be seen as stable, predictable, and true to its word. To act in contradiction to a previous stance is cognitively dissonant. It creates a psychic friction the mind will rush to resolve. Once you have said yes to a small thing, you have begun writing a story about yourself, the story of a person who agrees, who supports, who is part of this. The next request, slightly larger, is no longer just a request. It is an opportunity to be consistent with the character you have just begun to author. To refuse now is not merely to say no. It is to become incoherent to yourself, to tear up the opening page of your own narrative. The influencer simply turns the page for you. They build the ladder one rung at a time, knowing that the first step off the ground commits you to the climb. The commitment is the prison, and you become its most diligent guard, rationalizing each subsequent step as proof of your own integrity, not of their design. You are not being pulled. You are following your own footsteps, now leading you into a terrain you never intended to visit. These hooks, scarcity, authority, consistency, are not anomalies. They are the latent tension in the fabric of normal life. They work because they are magnifications of our ordinary impulses. To secure what is valuable, to trust those who seem to know, to be a person of our word. The manipulation lies not in creating new desires, but in twisting these innate, often virtuous tendencies into instruments of external will. The clock ticks not because time is short, but because your perception of it has been hijacked. The figure inspires not because of proven wisdom, but because of the costume of certainty they wear. The path feels right, not because of its destination, but because you recognize your own footprints at the start. You move through a world laden with these silent psychological pressure points. A world designed to make you hurry, to make you defer, to make you cling to the past version of yourself. The hooks are so polished, so aligned with the contours of your own mind, that the tug feels like a thought you just happen to have. And the final quiet realization is this: the most effective cage is one you believe you are building for yourself, one thoughtful, consistent choice at a time. Chapter 5. Emotional Engineering. Emotion is not the weather of the mind, a passive, unpredictable system. It is the climate, and a climate can be engineered. Consider a single familiar ache, the dull, heavy pressure behind the breastbone when you believe you have caused disappointment. It is a specific gravity, pulling your thoughts inward, bending your posture into an apology before a word is spoken. This feeling, guilt, is a social adhesive, a moral compass, but a compass can be hijacked. Its needle can be made to tremble not toward true north, but toward a pole of another's design. Guilt programming begins not with an accusation, but with an unspoken ledger. It is the subtle implantation of a debt you did not agree you owed. The language is never "you owe me." It is "after all I've done," or "I didn't expect this from you." It is the sigh that follows your independent choice, the wounded silence that greets your boundary, the frail smile that says, "I'll manage, don't worry about." The hook is not in the other's demand, but in the internal narrative they inspire within you. The story of your own insufficiency, your potential for cruelty in simply being yourself. This guilt is a slow drip. Each drop etches a deeper channel in your psyche, until the current of their disappointment becomes the only flow you recognize. Your actions are no longer guided by your own values, but by the desperate need to silence the internal alarm they have installed. You are not complying. You are performing emotional penance for a sin you cannot name, in a religion you never chose to join. The cage is built from the inside, with bars of your own forged conscience. If guilt controls through the past, the debt of what you have allegedly done or failed to do, fear implantation controls through the future. It is the speculative shadow cast before you. The process is not about introducing a brand new terror. It is about connecting a pre-existing dormant anxiety to a specific outcome they control. It is the gentle linking of your deep-seated fear of irrelevance to the prospect of missing this opportunity. It is the subtle binding of your need for security to the danger of questioning their authority. They do not create the fear. They become its curator, its interpreter. It's not me you should be worried about. The implication whispers, it's the chaos, the loss, the desolation that awaits without my guidance. They position themselves not as the threat, but as the sole bulwark against a world of threats they have helped you to vividly imagine. The mind, once shown a possible abyss, will cling to any handrail, even if it is the hand that pointed to the drop. The engineered fear becomes a cognitive parasite, distorting your perception of risk and reward until the safest choice, the only sane choice, aligns perfectly with their will. You are not fleeing from them. You are fleeing, they assure you, from the monster only they can see, and only they can hold at bay. Then there is the opposite pole. Not the engineering of pain, but the orchestration of sublime relief. It begins with a sunburst of attention, an intensity of appreciation that feels like a summer rain after a drought you hadn't fully acknowledged. Your thoughts are anticipated. Your words are cherished. Your presence is described as transformative. This is the flood of validation, the overwhelming wave of belonging, the chemical sunrise of being seen as perfect. This is emotional addiction engineered. The initial inundation, the praise, the gifts, the focused, rapt attention, serves a precise biochemical purpose. It triggers a cascade of reward chemicals, bonding the sensation of euphoria to the source of its delivery. You are not just liked, you are needed, you are the answer. But a flood is not a sustainable ecosystem. It must recede. The withdrawal is the mechanism. The warmth cools, the attention shifts, the mirror of adoration clouds over. You are left in the sudden, quiet chill of normalcy, which now feels like deprivation. Your system craves the previous high, and so you begin to work for it. You edit your opinions, you shape your behaviors, you offer pieces of your autonomy, hoping to re-trigger the deluge. The engineer of this cycle controls not through the presence of pain, but through the strategic administration of reward. You are not a prisoner, you are a petitioner at a temple, performing rituals to summon a God who is, by design, intermittently attentive. Guilt, fear, and engineered love are not separate tools. They are a unified system of emotional chemistry. Guilt lowers your resistance. Fear defines the walls of your world. The intermittent, intense reward makes the cage feel, at times, like a sanctuary. It is the transformation of a human relationship into a psychological Skinner box, where you are taught, through a carefully calibrated system of negative and positive reinforcement, to press the lever that delivers them control. You may recognize the echoes, the hollow after a conversation where you ended up apologizing for your own reasonable request, the low-grade anxiety that surrounds a certain person, an anxiety you justify as just being careful, the dizzying high and crushing low of a connection that feels more like a possession than a partnership. This is the dark art of emotional engineering, the deliberate, covert manipulation of your deepest affective currents to redirect the course of your will. The engineer does not fight your emotions, they enlist them. They become the author of your inner narrative, the composer of your heart's uneasy rhythm. The quiet, unsettling realization is that your emotional landscape, the very terrain you believed was most intimately, authentically yours, is not impervious to cultivation. The feelings of obligation, of anxiety, of addictive attachment can be seeded, watered, and harvested by a hand other than your own. And the most sophisticated engineering leaves no fingerprints. only the growing conviction that the storm, the drought, the longing, and the relief all originated within you. By the time you question the climate, you have already learned to live in its weather. Chapter 6. Gaslighting and Reality Distortion. The past is not a fixed record. It is a story told by the winner. And sometimes the victory is not over events, but over their meaning. It begins with a flicker, a subtle misalignment between your recollection and the account presented to you. That's not how it happened, they say, with a calm that feels like solid ground. You're remembering it wrong the first time you dismiss it, a simple misunderstanding. The second time, a quirk of memory. By the third, a quiet fracture has appeared in the foundation of your certainty. This is the opening move, not the imposition of a new reality, but the careful, targeted weakening of your trust in your own. Gaslighting is not a lie. It is an atmosphere. It is the slow replacement of the air you breathe with a gentler, more toxic element. Not doubt about facts, but doubt about your very capacity to perceive them. Your confidence is not attacked head-on. It is incrementally dissolved. A raised eyebrow at your emotional reaction. A patient, condescending correction of a minor detail you were sure of. You're so sensitive, they sigh, not in anger but in concern. You always get the little things mixed up, don't you? The hook is not in the correction, but in the implied diagnosis. Your instrument of perception is flawed. You cannot trust your own gauges. When the bedrock of memory becomes soft, you are learning to speak with a quiet question mark at the end of every sentence. The manipulator, observing this, offers the gift of their clarity. They become the reliable narrator in a world where your own chapters keep rewriting themselves. This leads to the second, more profound phase, narrative capture. Once your own recollection is framed as unreliable, the space is cleared for a new story to be written. This story is not a wholesale fabrication. That would be too jarring, too easy to reject. It is a meticulous edit. Motives are reassigned. Sequences are rearranged. Your actions are reinterpreted through a lens of pathology or foolishness. While theirs are polished with the gloss of noble intention, a hurtful comment becomes a joke you took too seriously. Your justified anger becomes proof of your instability. Their control is reframed as protection from your own poor judgment. You are presented with this new, coherent, emotionally plausible narrative. To reject it is to return to the terrifying chaos of your own perceived unreliability. To accept it is to gain a stable, if painful, version of events. The mind, craving coherence above all, will often choose the pain of a negative story over the vertigo of no story at all. You begin to cite their version to yourself, trying it on. Over time, the foreign narrative, through sheer repetition and the absence of a credible alternative, softens and molds to the contours of your mind. The edit is accepted. The past has been rewritten, and you are the co-author, signing your name in the ink of your own surrendered certainty. The final locking mechanism is engineered dependency. When your own senses are framed as treacherous and your memories as fictional, you are left psychologically marooned. There is only one source left that seems to offer a consistent, unshaking version of reality: them. You begin to rely on their interpretation of events as an astronomer relies on a stable telescope. You check in for the correct reading of a social interaction, the true meaning of a friend's text, the real reason you feel a certain way. Was that okay for me to say? What did he mean by that? Am I overreacting? They answer with reassuring certainty. They become your compass, your dictionary, your touchstone. This dependency is not gratitude. It is a deep psychic bondage. Your autonomy has been quietly transferred. To question them now is not merely to disagree. It is to willfully blind yourself, to choose the chaotic abyss of your own distorted perception over the clear map they provide. The cage is complete. The door is open, but you no longer trust your legs to carry you, or your eyes to see the way. The true horror of this process is its seamless invisibility. From the inside, it does not feel like manipulation. It feels like being saved from yourself. It feels like the slow, humbling, and necessary realization of your own cognitive failings, guided by a patient, clearer-minded soul. The breakdown is reframed as a breakthrough. The imprisonment feels like sanctuary. You may recognize the ghost of this process. That relationship where you found yourself endlessly apologizing for reactions you could no longer define. The professional environment where the goalposts of success and failure seemed to move with a logic only one person understood. The creeping sense that you have become a stranger to your own history, a guest in your own emotional life. Gaslighting is the ultimate colonization of the mind. It does not seek to conquer your thoughts directly. It conquers the ministry of truth within you. It replaces your internal historian, your emotional cartographer, with a puppet government that answers to a foreign power. You live in an occupied territory, flying your own flag, repeating your own slogans, all composed by the regime that dismantled your sovereignty before you noticed the transfer of power. The quiet, unsettling realization is that reality is a shared project. We build it through consensus, through trusted voices, through the mutual validation of our perceptions. Our very sanity is social. This innate vulnerability, our need for our reality to be reflected and confirmed, is the precise pressure point this process exploits. It turns our fundamental need for connection into the instrument of our isolation. By the time you think to question the official history, your own archives have been altered, your witnesses discredited, and the only authority left to appeal to is the one that wrote the revised edition. Chapter 7. Identity Manipulation. You do not possess a self. You negotiate one in a silent, lifelong conference room. The attendees are countless, echoes of parental expectations, reflections from friends' eyes, societal portraits of success, the whispered judgments of strangers. From this chorus, you curate a working draft of you. It feels solid, familiar, yours. But what if one voice in that chorus began subtly to edit the minutes? To highlight certain lines, redact others, and slowly rewrite the defining document. This is not an attack on your actions, but on the very source from which actions spring, your identity. It is the most profound manipulation possible, not to make you do something, but to make you become someone. The process begins with selective reflection. Every person seeks their identity in the social mirror. The manipulator simply becomes the holder of the most important glass. They do not invent flaws or virtues wholesale. That would be too crude, too easily rejected. Instead, they practice a deliberate art of emphasis and omission. They reflect back to you only certain fragments of your being, while letting other parts fall into perceptual shadow. Perhaps they consistently praise your compliance, framing it as loyalty, while ignoring your independence. They might pathologize your ambition as ruthlessness, while highlighting your compassion as your true self. Each reflection is plausible, a facet of the whole. But through repetition, the reflected fragments begin to feel like the complete picture. You start to perform toward the reflection, strengthening the traits that earn the validating glow, letting the unmirrored traits atrophy from disuse. You are not being told who to be. You are being shown a version of yourself. And in your natural desire to coalesce into a coherent person, you begin to fill the outline they have illuminated. This curated reflection creates the groundwork for the second, more destabilizing phase, the systematic weakening of self-trust. If the manipulator's mirror defines what you are, their next move is to undermine your confidence in your own ability to see anything at all. Your instincts are gently rebranded as impulses. Your independent judgments are framed as naivete. Your emotions are treated as fascinating, but ultimately unreliable. Weather systems within you, interesting to observe, but not to be used for navigation. You're so emotional when you think about that, they say, with clinical detachment. Or, that's just your insecurity talking. Your internal cues, the gut feeling, the spark of joy, the pang of unease, are dissected and attributed to past wounds or inherent fragility, not to present valid perception. Over time, you learn to dismiss your own inner compass. Before making a choice, you instinctively look to their face to read the weather. Before trusting a feeling, you run it through the filter of their possible interpretation. Your own psyche becomes a foreign landscape, and they position themselves as the only reliable guide. You no longer lose arguments with them. You lose confidence in the very material from which arguments are built, your own lived experience. From this eroded foundation blooms the final binding dependency, emotional captivity. When you cannot trust your own sense of self, your own judgments, or your own feelings, you are left in a state of profound psychic homelessness. The manipulator, having carefully dismantled your inner shelter, now offers the stability of their definition, their judgment, their emotional framework. Your need becomes existential. You depend on them not for love, in any pure sense, but for the basic coherence of your reality. They tell you who you are on a given day, whether you are strong or fragile, right or wrong, good or self. This dependency is far deeper than neediness. It is a reversal of creation. They become the author, you the character. To defy them is not to risk loneliness. It is to risk ontological collapse, to step into the void of being undefined. The cage is not of love or fear alone, but of meaning itself. The lock is the terrifying question. If I am not who they say I am, then what am I? You may trace the ghost of this process in the slow narrowing of a life. The hobbies once loved that were subtly mocked into irrelevance. The career path that was concernedly questioned until it was abandoned. The friends who were analytically picked apart until you drifted away, isolated. Each step felt like a personal choice, a maturation, a shedding of former skins. In reality, it was a gradual inheritance of a prefabricated identity, assembled by another for their own comfort, control, or sustenance. Identity manipulation is the psychological equivalent of building a ship for someone, teaching them their own hands are too clumsy to sail, and then becoming the only captain who can navigate the very waters you convinced them were treacherous. They stand at the wheel, grateful for the direction, mourning their own lost seamanship as a personal failing, not a planned disablement. The quiet, unsettling realization is this: the self is not a fortress, but a narrative, and narratives are vulnerable to skilled editors. The traits, the memories, the core beliefs you consider most intimately you, these are not granite, but clay. They can be shaped by persistent, patient hands. The most profound influence occurs not when someone changes your mind, but when they change the eye that holds the mind. By the time you think to question the portrait of yourself you've been presented, you've already hung it in the gallery of your soul and learned to bow before it. Chapter 8. Silent Control Strategies. Control often announces itself with a whisper, not a shout. It breathes in the space between words. Consider the subtle physics of a room just entered. A figure crosses the threshold, and the atmosphere undergoes a silent shift. A change in barometric pressure felt in the body before it is understood by the mind. Chairs adjust slightly. Conversations subtly decelerate. Attention, like iron filings, aligns to a new magnetic north. This is non-verbal dominance, and it operates on a frequency below conscious negotiation. It is the unspoken calculus of space, time, and gaze that establishes hierarchy without uttering a single claim. The body can be weaponized into a territory, the steady, unblinking gaze that holds a second too long. Not in curiosity, but in measurement. The deliberate expansion into space. A wide stance, arms rested on adjacent chairs. A slow, controlled settling into an environment that declares it theirs. The calculated violation of your personal sphere, standing just inside the boundary where discomfort begins, forcing your body to make the adjustment to cede ground. These are not actions but emissions. They broadcast a simple, primal signal. I set the terms of engagement. Your subconscious reads the signal and responds with a cocktail of cortisol and compliance, long before your conscious mind can formulate a reason to resist. Then there is the weaponization of absence. If non-verbal presence is a form of pressure, strategic silence is the vacuum it creates. It is not mere quietness. It is a loaded, pregnant stillness deployed as punctuation. The silence that follows your expressed need, your vulnerable admission, your attempt at conflict. It is a void into which your words fall. unanswered, their meaning evaporating in the absence of reflection. This silence is not passive. It is an active erasure. It tells you that your emotional output has been deemed unworthy of a response, that your transaction has been declined without explanation. Withdrawal is its more advanced form, the removal of warmth, attention, or presence as a corrective measure. The unreturned call after a disagreement, the physical turning away, the sudden professional coolness where there was once camaraderie. This is a masterclass in behavioral conditioning. You are not being punished with anger, which would give you a thing to push against. You are being taught with deprivation. Your psyche, craving the restoration of the previous equilibrium, will instinctively audit your own behavior to discover what transgression caused the loss. You will offer concessions, apologies, or compliance, not because you are convinced, but because you are trying to restore the emotional oxygen they have quietly removed. The controller does not need to argue their case. They simply allow the silent, aching void to argue for them. Beneath these macroscopic strategies runs the subterranean river of subconscious signaling, the world of micro-expressions and nearly invisible cues. These are the flickers at the edges of the mask. A nanosecond of contempt that crosses a smiling face, a brief hardening of the eyes that belies soothing words, a micromuscular flinch of disgust at a touch. These signals are not consciously controlled, they are leaks from the interior. But for the adept, they can also become deliberate if covert broadcasts. A barely perceptible sigh during your presentation, a slight weary shake of the head as you speak, unseen by others but perfectly framed for your eyes, a fleeting smirk quickly buried under a veneer of neutrality. These cues bypass your logical defenses and speak directly to your limbic system. They convey dismissal, boredom, or ridicule on a channel your conscious mind cannot fully tune into, but your body feels viscerally. You are left with a diffuse sense of being undermined, of being foolish, without a single concrete statement to challenge. Your confidence drains, not from criticism, but from a ghost of a smile. Your argument falters, not from counterpoints, but from a nearly invisible wince of disappointment from the person you wish to please. Together, these silent strategies form an architecture of influence built from shadows and negative space. It is a language without a dictionary, a grammar of dominance written in pauses, proximity, and biological leakage. The victim of such strategies often finds themselves in a state of profound confusion. They feel dominated but cannot say how. They feel punished but cannot name the crime. They feel a constant low-grade anxiety in the presence of the controller, a sense of walking on unseen terrain that might give way at any moment. The power lies in deniability. I was just listening, they say of their silence. I'm just comfortable, they say of their spatial invasion. You're reading too much into my face, they say of the micro-expression. You are left doubting your own perception, fighting a ghost, wrestling with an absence. The battlefield is your own nervous system. The quiet, unsettling realization is that the most potent controls are those that leave no fingerprints on the conscious mind, only bruises on the soul. We are bioelectrical organisms, deeply programmed to read the silence of the forest, the posture of the predator, the approving nod of the tribe. These ancient pathways are still open, still operational in conference rooms and living rooms. The modern manipulator, perhaps instinctively, perhaps calculatedly, becomes a synthesizer of these primal signals. You may leave such an encounter with no memory of a harsh word, yet feel emotionally flayed. You may have a conversation that was, on paper, perfectly civil, yet feel your energy siphoned away. This is the aftermath of silent warfare. The territory conquered was not your actions, but your inner peace. The weapon was not an argument, but an atmosphere. And by the time you think to question the air you're breathing, your lungs have already adapted to the poison. Chapter 9. Darvo and Role Reversal. Reality can be inverted, not by magic, but by a simple, brutal reframing of the moral axis. It begins with a gentle, immovable denial. You present a fact, a feeling, a record of hurt. The response is not a counter-argument, but a soft, implacable erasure. That never happened. You're misunderstanding. I have no idea what you're talking about. The tone is not defensive, but puzzled, almost concerned for your grasp on events. This first move is not a lie in the classical sense, it is the laying of a new foundation. By denying the shared premise of reality, they force you to abandon the solid ground of what happened and join them in the shifting sands of what might have been perceived. Your evidence is not rebutted, it is rendered irrelevant. You are no longer a participant in a conflict. You have become a diagnostician, trying to prove a symptom exists to a doctor who insists you are imagining the illness. From this cultivated confusion, the pivot is swift and violent. Having destabilized your claim, they now attack the source. This is not a critique of your argument, but an assault on your credibility, your character, your sanity. You're so sensitive. You see attacks everywhere. After all I've done for you, this is the thanks I get. You have a real problem with remembering things correct. The attack is often personal, disproportionate to the original grievance, and delivered with a heat that makes your initial careful complaint seem ludicrously mild by comparison. It is a preemptive strike against your right to have a grievance at all. Your position is now reversed. You entered as the party bringing a concern. You now find yourself defending your own basic rationality, your emotional stability, your goodness. The original issue evaporates in the smoke of this new, more urgent fire. You are no longer seeking accountability. You are fending off a condemnation. Then comes the masterstroke, the reversal. Having denied the act and attacked the accuser, they now perform the most audacious psychological sleight of hand. They assume the mantle of the victim. Wounded by your false accusation, exhausted by your drama, hurt by your lack of trust. They sigh with the weariness of the persecuted. They may retreat or display a performance of injured nobility. I just don't know how to make you happy. I feel like I'm walking on eggshells. Look what you're doing to me. The moral universe has been flipped. You began with a wound, and now you are holding the knife. You sought an apology, and now you are required to give one. The mechanism works because it exploits a fundamental rule of social physics. It is easier to assume guilt than to endure the cognitive dissonance of having caused someone pain while believing oneself to be good. Faced with THEIR rojo of victimhood, your empathy is weaponized against you. To continue to press your claim now feels like cruelty. To doubt yourself feels like justice. This is the anatomy of blame shifting. Accountability is not avoided. It is launched like a heat-seeking missile back toward its origin. The process turns the very act of holding someone responsible into the new and greater crime. The language of therapy, of boundaries of self-care is neatly inverted. Your attempt to set a limit is framed as an aggression. Their retaliation is framed as self-protection. They are not evading accountability. They are portraying your demand for it as the original sin. The weaponization of accountability creates a perfect, inescapable circuit. Any attempt to identify a problem becomes by definition the problem itself. The system is designed to make the only path to peace your surrender of the right to name what harms you. You learn, through exhausting repetition, that the cost of speaking is a psychological whiplash that leaves you disoriented, guilty, and alone. The safer path is silence, and the acceptance of a secret personal reality you must never voice. You may recognize the ghost of this pattern, the argument where you ended up comforting the person who hurt you, the workplace confrontation where your documented concern resulted in a formal meeting about your communication style, the relationship where every expression of need spawned a longer, more compelling list of their own sufferings, until your need was buried under the archaeology of their grievances. Darvo is not a conflict. It is the systematic sabotage of conflict's very possibility. It makes the shared search for truth morally impossible. It replaces the dyad of offender and affected with the dyad of persecutor and persecuted. It is emotional jurisprudence where the judge is the defendant. The plaintiff is automatically guilty of defamation, and the only lawful outcome is the invalidation of the complaint. The quiet, unsettling realization is that this reversal works because it parasitizes our deepest social virtues, our capacity for empathy, our desire for fairness, our willingness to believe we might be wrong. It turns conscience against itself. You are left in a hall of mirrors where every gesture of self-defense makes you look more like the monster they now gently, sadly describe. The ground beneath you is no longer solid. It is a rotating stage, and someone else controls the mechanism. By the time you try to find your footing, you have already been cast in the role written for you, reciting lines that cast your own truth as fiction and your pain as proof of your guilt. Chapter 10. Dark Psychology in Relationships. Love should not feel like a salvation earned through incremental surrenders. Yet in certain chambers of the heart, a different chemistry takes hold. It begins not with malice, but with an intensity mistaken for destiny. A connection that feels electrically profound, where understanding seems to bypass words. This is the hook, the presentation of a soulmate, a mirror that reflects not who you are, but who you have desperately hoped to be. In this initial gleaming reflection, you do not see the frame or the hand that holds it. You only see the dazzling image of home. This is the prelude to a specific, potent bond, one forged not in shared joy, but in shared pain. The term trauma bonding is clinical, but the experience is alchemical. The bond does not form in spite of the hurt, but because of it, and more precisely, because of the repair that follows. The cycle is the engine, a period of tension, a storm of conflict or withdrawal, a painful rupture. Then the sun breaks through. The apology is profound, the reunion euphoric, the affection more potent than before. This reward, the blissful relief after the storm, is chemically branded onto your psyche. The brain, in its simple logic, begins to associate the highest peaks of connection with the valleys that preceded them. The pain becomes a prerequisite for the prize. You are not bonding to the person, but to the cycle of destruction and rescue. They become both the source of the wound and the sole provider of the antidote. To leave is not to lose a partner. It is to forfeit the only medicine that can soothe the ache they taught you to carry. This cycle is powered by a relentless push-pull dynamic. It is the breath of the relationship, an inhale of suffocating closeness, an exhale of terrifying abandonment. The push is often a devaluation, criticism, coldness, the creation of emotional distance. You are left stranded, scrambling to diagnose your failure, to re-become the person worthy of the initial glorious pull. And then it comes, the magnetic draw back in. Affection returns, promises are made, the mirror shines again. This intermittent reinforcement is the most powerful addictive engine known to behavioral science. A predictable reward becomes routine. An unpredictable one becomes an obsession. You become a petitioner waiting for a blessing, your focus narrowing to the subtle signs of their shifting moods, your world shrinking to the dimensions of their approval. The architecture built from this cycle is emotional imprisonment. The bars are not iron, but fused from your own adapted instincts. Your empathy, twisted into a tool, keeps you analyzing their pain to excuse your own. Your loyalty, weaponized, makes leaving feel like a profound betrayal of a sacred vow. Your hope, the most human of fuels, is directed toward a single fading point of light. The memory of the pull, the dream that this time the repair will be permanent. The prison is decorated with the language of love, but its function is control. I do this because I love you so much, translates to a justification for surveillance or rage. We have such a deep, intense connection, explains the exhausting cyclical drama. Love is framed not as a steady state of mutual regard, but as a transcendent, torturous destiny that justifies all suffering. Within these walls, your reality is systematically dismantled. Your grievances are reframed as proof of your inadequacy. Your sadness becomes your neediness. Your anger becomes your instability. The goal is not to make you hate them, but to make you distrust yourself so completely that their version of reality becomes your only sanctuary. You are taught that your emotional survival depends on your ability to anticipate their needs, manage their moods, and absolve their transgressions. The relationship ceases to be a partnership and becomes a full-time occupation in psychological maintenance, where the wage paid is the occasional, glorious respite from their displeasure. You may recognize the haunting silhouette of this structure. The relationship you couldn't explain to friends because the stories sounded insane outside the charged atmosphere you inhabited. The profound loneliness felt in the very arms of a partner. The creeping realization that you have been speaking a language of care while slowly being erased from the conversation of your own life. This is dark psychology in its most intimate form. It is the colonization of the heart's territory. It uses the raw material of human vulnerability, our need for connection, our capacity for forgiveness, our yearning for profound understanding, to construct a labyrinth from which the soul struggles to find an exit. The jailer holds not a key, but a photograph of the single beautiful day you spent in the garden, now locked forever behind. The quiet, unsettling realization is that the most perfect prison is one the captive builds around their own heart, brick by brick, mistaking each brick for a proof of love. The deepest captivity whispers not of chains, but of fate. And by the time you think to test the door, you have forgotten the feel of the open air and come to believe that this small, charged room is the entirety of the world. Chapter 11. Workplace and Power Games. The most sophisticated games are never announced. They are played on a board that looks like a spreadsheet, in pieces that look like org charts, with rules written in the invisible ink of precedent and nuance. Consider the meeting after the meeting, the one you were not invited to, but whose consequences you feel in the sudden, subtle shift of a project's trajectory. A decision seemingly collective and logical has been made. Yet the architecture of the choice feels alien, its foundation laid somewhere you couldn't witness. This is the first move, the relocation of the true debate to shadow chambers. Influence here is not about winning arguments in the room, it is about defining the room in which arguments are allowed to occur. Office manipulation operates on a currency of perception. Since hard authority is often diffused, control is secured by controlling the narrative that surrounds competence, contribution, and credit. The tactics are rarely confrontational. They are administrative. A carefully worded email, copied to precisely the right people, that recaps a discussion with a slight but significant editorial slant. A helpful summary that attributes the blunt force of an idea to the team, but its crucial, elegant refinement to oneself. The delayed response to a query that creates a bottleneck, making others progress dependent on your schedule, thus framing your pace as diligence and their urgency as poor planning. This is the art of reputation sculpting, a slow, persistent process of directing the light. It involves the strategic offering of praise to allies and the damning with faint praise or strategic silence regarding rivals. A reputation is not destroyed. It is gently eroded through 1,000 tiny omissions and muted accolades. She's great with details, said with a slight, weary smile, can over time build a cage of minutiae around a strategic mind. The narrative becomes truth through repetition, not through evidence. But the most potent form of power is often held by those without formal authority. It is subtle dominance, engineered through social and informational physics. It is the colleague who has mastered the ecosystem's hidden pathways, the administrator who knows where budgets are buried, the veteran who remembers why past initiatives failed, the networker who possesses a private map of alliances and animosities. Their dominance is expressed through calibrated disclosures and withholdings, the forgotten CC on an essential email, the casual mention of a deadline everyone else seems to have missed, the offering of crucial intelligence framed as a personal favor, creating a debt. They control not by command, but by becoming an indispensable switch in the circuit. To cross them is not to face a reprimand, but to risk a mysterious system's failure. A lost file, a scheduling conflict, a vague but potent whisper of unreliability that begins to circulate. These players understand that in the modern workplace, Overt aggression is a weakness. The true lever is the manufacturing of consensus. This is achieved through pre-wiring. Before a formal meeting, conversations are had in corridors, over coffee, in discreet instant messages. Opinions are shaped, objections neutralized, alliances secured. By the time the official gathering convenes, the outcome is not decided but ceremonially confirmed. The dissenter is not arguing with a person. They are arguing against the serene, immovable tide of a shared direction that was privately engineered hours before. The emotional landscape cultivated is one of chronic low-grade uncertainty. This is the psychological cage. It is not the fear of being fired, but the fear of being misread, of being on the wrong side of an unwritten rule, of having your contributions silently catalogued as liabilities rather than assets. This anxiety keeps everyone self-monitoring, politically astute, and ultimately compliant. Initiative is tempered by the unseen calculation of how it will be narratively captured by others. Authentic collaboration is suspect, for any vulnerability shared may be stored as tactical information. You may recognize the chilling familiarity of this theater, the project that was your idea, but whose ownership subtly migrated upward in a series of status reports. The credit that flowed like water toward those who narrated the story of success, not those who performed the labor. The feeling of pushing against a fog, an opponent you cannot see, a resistance that has no name, only effects. The workplace in this light is not merely a site of production. It is a dense forest of social signaling, where power flows not through titles alone, but through the silent control of context, narrative, and emotional climate. The master player does not need the largest office. They need the most accurate map of the forest, and the quietest way to redirect its paths. The quiet, unsettling realization is that you are always participating whether you wish to or not. Your refusal to play the narrative game is itself a narrative, one that will be written for you, and likely entitled, "Not a Team Player," or lacks political acumen. In an ecosystem where perception is the primary reality, to abstain from shaping it is to surrender yourself to be shaped by others. The game never ends, it only adjourns, and by the time you learn the rules, you may already be checkmated by a move that happened 3 turns ago, in a room you didn't know was part of the board. Chapter 12. Mass Manipulation and Social Control. The most profound manipulation is the one you cannot see because it forms the entirety of your visible world. It begins not with a command but with a slow, ambient rearrangement of the symbolic environment. Consider the quiet moment scrolling through a curated feed, the seamless transition from news to entertainment to a friend's curated life. There is no single voice of authority, only a gentle, algorithmically tailored current carrying you from one emotionally resonant fragment to the next. You feel no hand on your shoulder. You only sense the current and adjust your footing accordingly. This is the new architecture of influence. Not a prison with walls, but an ocean with currents. You are free to swim in any direction, yet the tides are engineered. Modern propaganda is rarely a blatant lie. Blatant lies invite scrutiny. The more sophisticated method is the overwhelming flood of selective truths. It is the presentation of a mosaic where every tessera is factual, but the assembled image tells a story that reality did not compose. The process is not deception, but narrative landscaping. Certain facts are elevated to permanent prominence, repeated until they become landmarks. Others are buried in the quiet soil of obscurity. 1,000 complexities are flattened into a compelling, emotionally satisfying story arc of heroes, threats, and inevitable victories. The mind, overwhelmed by data and craving coherence, gratefully accepts the prefabricated narrative. To question it is not to dispute a fact, but to reject the comfort of a comprehensible world. This landscaping is performed by perception engines, media systems, social platforms, cultural institutions that function less as mirrors of reality and more as its primary architects. They do not tell you what to think. They tell you what to think about, and more importantly, how to think about it. The framing is everything. A protest is coded as a riot or a movement through diction. An economic shift is portrayed as a correction or a collapse through metaphor. Each frame comes preloaded with emotional and moral connotations, bypassing analytical centers and speaking directly to tribal identification. You are offered not just information, but an identity wrapped around a perspective. To consume the media is to slowly inherit its cosmology. Within this engineered landscape, the individual is not a sovereign mind, but a node in a collective nervous system. This is where crowd psychology transcends the physical gathering and becomes a digital perpetual state. The mechanisms of collective hypnosis, repetition, emotional contagion, the suppression of dissenting signals are amplified to a societal scale. An idea gains not through its merit, but through its spread, its mimetic fitness. Nuance is a disadvantage. Stark, shareable emotion is the currency. The crowd mind is not the sum of its individuals, but a separate entity with its own logic, one that prizes belonging over truth, certainty over accuracy, and movement over direction. The most potent tool in this domain is not the creation of belief, but the cultivation of exhaustion. A relentless barrage of crises, controversies, and oppositions. The constant low-grade alarm. This psychic fatigue makes the populace susceptible to the simplest solution, the strongest leader, the cleanest narrative. A tired mind does not seek truth, it seeks respite. It will grasp at any certainty offered, any enemy defined, any simple story that promises to quiet the cognitive noise. The manipulator of masses offers not policies, but sedation, not a future, but a cessation of the unbearable present. You can see the architecture in the rituals of performative outrage and the theaters of symbolic politics. The grand empty gestures that channel emotional energy into harmless spectacle. The division of the world into sacred allies and profane enemies. A division that must be constantly tended and policed. The goal is to keep the collective nervous system in a state of manageable agitation, forever oscillating between fear and righteousness, too preoccupied with the shadow play to examine the mechanics of the projector. This system culminates in a subtle, pervasive dependency. When your perception of reality is so thoroughly mediated, you become reliant on the mediators. You return to them not just for information, but for your very sense of what is significant, what is real, what is possible. You are the audience in a grand immersive play, and to question the plot is to risk being ejected from the shared reality of the theater. The isolation seems more terrifying than the possibility that the drama is a manipulation. The quiet, unsettling realization is that you are not outside this system looking in. You are a constituent part of its chemistry. Your clicks, your attention, your shared indignation, your passive consumption. These are the raw materials processed by the engine. Your own psychology, with its needs for coherence, belonging, and emotional resonance, is the precise substrate upon which mass influence grows. The manipulation works because it is not an alien imposition, but a skilled exploitation of your own innate cognitive and social programming. You live inside an engineered consensus. The borders of acceptable thought, the vocabulary of debate, the very horizons of what is considered realistic or utopian. These are not natural formations. They are cultivated. To think outside them is not just to have a different opinion. It is to experience a profound social synaptic disconnection. The most sophisticated cage for the human mind is one made of shared assumptions, reflected so universally that they appear as the sky itself. And by the time you think to question the nature of the air you breathe, your lungs have become acclimated to its particular mixture, and the outside world seems not like freedom, but like a vacuum. Chapter 13. Detecting manipulation in real time. Detection begins not in the mind, but in the body. A subtle somatic discordance, a tightening in the solar plexus, a faint metallic taste of adrenaline on the tongue during a seemingly benign conversation. The mind races to explain it away. Stress, fatigue, misunderstanding. But the body's ledger is older and simpler. It records not narratives, but voltages. It registers the discrepancy between the words spoken and the current running beneath them. This is the first, quiet alarm. The feeling that you are participating in one conversation while your physiology is reacting to another, unseen one. These physiological signals are the precursors to recognizable patterns. The patterns themselves are not proof, but they are the fault lines where the hidden machinery stresses the surface. Observe the flow of accountability. In healthy exchange, responsibility flows toward the speaker for their words, their actions, their emotion. In manipulated discourse, you will notice a peculiar hydraulic reversal. Accountability, like liquid, is siphoned away from its source and redirected toward you. Your question about a broken promise becomes a lecture on your unrealistic expectations. Your expression of hurt becomes an indictment of your sensitivity. The content of your statement is ignored. Its emotional impact on them becomes the new and more pressing subject. The conversation perpetually pivots away from their action and onto your reaction, until you find yourself lost in a labyrinth of your own alleged flaws, the original issue forgotten. Simultaneously track the consistency of reality. The gaslighter's signature is not a single lie, but a gradual softening of the edges of shared experience. Small, verifiable details. What was said? Who was there when it happened? Begin to shimmer and blur in their recounting. I never said that, uttered with calm conviction. You're remembering the emotion, not the facts. These are not corrections. They are small surgical incisions into your trust in your own perception. The goal is not to convince you of a new truth, but to install a subtle virus of doubt about your ability to perceive truth at all. Over time, you may find yourself beginning sentences with, "Maybe I heard wrong," but a linguistic white flag hoisted before the conversation even begins. The emotional warning signals are less like flags and more like a shift in atmospheric pressure. The primary one is a chronic, low-grade confusion. Healthy disagreement clarifies, manipulation obfuscates. You leave interactions feeling mentally clouded, emotionally drained, and paradoxically guilty. This guilt is a key artifact. It is the emotional residue left when your natural boundaries have been violated, and your attempt to assert them has been framed as a transgression. Another signal is the walking on eggshells sensation, a hypervigilance where you find yourself editing your thoughts before they become words, anticipating potential landmines in another's mood. This is not respect, it is preemptive appeasement, the behavior of a subject in an unpredictable kingdom. Language itself becomes a minefield of cues. Listen for the pronoun shift. The communal we and us are often co-opted to create a false unity that pressures compliance. We really need to, or I thought we agreed, implies consensus where none was sought. The therapeutic lexicon weaponized. You're being defensive, you're projecting, that's your trauma speaking. These phrases, designed for self-reflection, are deployed as conversational termination switches, pathologizing your response and ending the discussion. Perhaps the most telling linguistic pattern is the bait and pivot. A provocative, often hurtful statement is made. When you react, the focus instantly shifts from the statement's content to the inappropriateness of your reaction. "I was just joking. Can't you take a joke?" Or, "Wow, you're really angry about this." The original sting is left to fester, unattended, while you are now put on trial for your response. The mechanism ensures you are always off balance, always defending, never able to establish a stable ground from which to be heard. The quiet, unsettling realization is that detecting these patterns irrevocably changes your relationship with the social world. It is not empowerment, but a kind of awakening to a layer of predation you wished you could unsee. You begin to notice the subtle hydraulic systems in conversations, the emotional siphon, the manufactured confusion. The world becomes slightly more transparent. And in that transparency, more chilling, you see the ghostly architecture of influence, the invisible walls, the hidden currents. This awareness carries a profound loneliness. You cannot unsee the patterns. You cannot force others to see them. To point them out is often to trigger the very mechanisms you are identifying. You are left navigating a dance where you hear not just the music, but the silent count of the choreographer. The clarity you gain is not a weapon, but a weight. And by the time you learn the language of these shadows, you realize the conversation has been happening around you, through you, all along. You were never just a participant, you were also the terrain. Chapter 14. Psychological Shields. The mind, once aware of the invisible war, does not seek a sword. It dreams of a door, not an exit from the world, but a boundary for the self. The fantasy is of an impermeable barrier, a psychic fortress where foreign intentions shatter and fall away. But the reality of defense is far less cinematic and far more architectural. It begins not with a wall, but with a slow, deliberate recalibration of internal space. The first quiet act of reclamation is not against the manipulator, but within the chaos of your own perceptions. You must learn to distinguish the weather from the climate of your own soul. Mental boundaries are not declared. They are discovered in the aftermath of their violation. That peculiar, hollow feeling after an interaction, the sense of having been subtly looted, this discomfort is a cartographer's tool. It maps the unseen frontier where your internal jurisdiction ended and another's influence was permitted to cross unchallenged. A boundary is not a rejection of others. It is the conscious delineation of where you end and where the world, its demands, its narratives, its emotional storms, begins. It is the decision that you are not public land. Establishing this frontier is an act of silent internal linguistics. It requires translating vague unease into a clear private statement. This is not for you. The statement is rarely voiced aloud. To do so would be to engage in the very combat it seeks to neutralize. Its power is exercised in the quiet theater of your own choices. It is the internal no that precedes and shapes the external yes or the reasoned silence. It is watching the provocative statement land and choosing not to pick it up. It is feeling the hook set and calmly, internally dissolving the line. From this foundational delineation emerges a capacity often mistaken for coldness, strategic emotional detachment. This is not the numbness of trauma, nor the poverty of indifference. It is a conscious temporary relocation of the observing self. Imagine your awareness as a chamber. Engagement pulls you into the center, where the heat and pressure of another's emotional field warp your own. Detachment is the act of withdrawing to the observation gallery. From this vantage, you can see the storm without being drenched by its. You can hear the plea, the threat, the flattery, and register its intended effect on your nervous system, while your core self remains anchored in a quieter, deeper water. This is the internal work of depersonalizing the attack. The manipulative barb is designed to find a specific tender spot, your insecurity, your pride, your longing, and fuse itself there. Detachment allows you to see the barb as a generic tool, to recognize its shape and trajectory, and to understand that its target could be anyone possessing that vulnerability. The content is about you, but the mechanism is not. This subtle shift in perspective defangs the emotion. You are no longer a wounded subject. You are a scientist observing a predictable chemical reaction. Your emotional energy is reserved, not drained. Reclaiming internal control, then, is the gradual transfer of authority back to your own sensory and cognitive apparatus. It is the systematic rehabilitation of trust in your own perceptions. That gut feeling, that flicker of doubt, that moment of confusion. These are not signs of your weakness, but your perimeter sensors firing. The work is to stop reflexively silencing them in favor of another's more confident narrative. It is to give your own discomfort a seat at the table of your judgment, not as the final arbiter, but as an honored guest with critical intelligence. This reclamation manifests as a slowing down. The manipulator's environment thrives on induced haste, the urgent decision, the immediate emotional reaction. Your shield is manufactured from deliberate pause, the beat you take before responding, the night you sleep on a decision, the let me think about that, inserted into a conversation pushing for instant commitment. This pause creates a buffer zone, a demilitarized area in time where your own processing can occur without the artillery of external pressure. The final, most complex shield is the recalibration of your own empathy. The manipulator's greatest weapon is often your own compassion, twisted into a lever for guilt and obligation. Protecting yourself does not require destroying this capacity. It requires insulating its circuitry. It means learning to differentiate between another's genuine need, which can be met freely, and their manufactured crisis designed to compel your service. It is the understanding that you can wish someone well from a distance, that compassion does not mandate proximity, and that love, real love, never requires the surrender of your core self as its price. The quiet, unsettling realization is that these shields do not make you invulnerable. They make you conscious. You will still feel the pressure, perceive the hook, sense the shift in atmospheric pressure. The difference is you will no longer mistake these sensations for your own idea. The fortress you build is not made of stone, but of space. The psychic space to observe, to discern, and to choose your alignment with the world. This is not victory. It is a different kind of engagement. One that trades the fever of the battlefield for the cool, silent watchfulness of the sentinel. You are not free from influence. No one ever is. But you begin to recognize the difference between being moved by a current and choosing to swim. The door you dreamed of does not lead out. It leads inward, to a room where the soundtrack of other people's designs grows faint, and where your own thoughts, for the first time in a long time, begin to clear their throats and speak in their own unedited voice. And by the time you recognize the architecture of your own interior, you understand that the strongest shield was never a barrier against the world, but the integrity of the ground upon which you finally decided to stand. Chapter 15. Breaking free from invisible chains. Freedom is not a sudden sunrise. It is the slow, meticulous disassembly of a lens through which you have learned to see the world. The most binding chains are not those that restrain movement, but those that dictate perception. To break free is not to flee a prison, but to realize you have been carrying its blueprint within you, mistaking its walls for horizons. The work of liberation begins not with a grand rebellion, but with a quiet, terrifying act of archaeology. You must excavate your own beliefs, holding each one to a new, unforgiving light, and ask the simple, devastating question, did I build this, or was it installed? Deprogramming is not an event, but a metabolism. It is the slow cellular process of breaking down foreign psychological material and synthesizing what remains into something your own system can recognize as native. A manipulated belief is rarely a standalone fiction. It is a graft, a foreign shoot spliced onto the trunk of a genuine need. The belief that you are inherently too much or not enough is often grafted onto your authentic desire for connection. The belief that your mistrust is paranoia is grafted onto your hard-won intuition. The separation is delicate surgical work. It requires tracing the belief back to its point of entry. Not to assign blame, but to identify the seam where your truth ends and their narrative began. This undoing feels less like enlightenment and more like vertigo. As the grafted beliefs loosen, the world loses a familiar, if painful, coherence. The old maps, the ones that clearly marked you as the problem, them as the savior, chaos as your natural state, begin to crumble. You are left in a blank space without landmarks. This disorientation is not a setback. It is evidence of the deconstruction. The mind, like nature, abhors a vacuum. It will rush to fill the void. The critical work is to slow this rush, to tolerate the emptiness, and to become the sole, careful architect of what comes next. From this cleared ground, the restoration of self-trust can begin. This is not about building confidence, which can be grandiose and brittle. It is about rebuilding credibility with yourself. It is the meticulous practice of keeping the smallest promises you make to yourself. Going to bed when you say you will, eating the meal you planned, honoring your own no as if it were uttered by someone you are sworn to protect. Each kept promise is a brick in a new foundation. You are teaching your deepest self that you are a reliable source of safety, that your own word has weight. This restoration is painfully literal. It happens in the body before it is understood by the mind. It is the moment you feel a tension in your gut during a conversation, and instead of arguing it away, you pause and listen. It is the act of choosing your own tiredness over another's demand and discovering that the world does not end. It is the gradual, wondrous recognition that your emotions are not enemies to be managed, but messengers that have been trying to deliver memos you were trained to shred upon receipt. Trust is regained not through triumph, but through the accumulated forensic evidence of your own consistent presence. Turning awareness into power, then, has nothing to do with controlling others. It has everything to do with governing the territory of the self. The power is in the pause, the synaptic gap between stimulus and response that manipulation seeks to erase. It is in that fissure of time that choice lives. The power is in recognizing the hook, feeling its pull in your viscera and choosing not to swim toward it. It is in hearing the loaded language, sensing the emotional vacuum being crafted for you to fill, and silently declining the invitation. This awareness grants a different kind of sight. You begin to see the mechanics of influence, not as a dark art practiced upon you, but as a pervasive dialect of human interaction. You see it in the advertisement, the political speech, the family gathering. The chains become visible everywhere, not to paralyze you with paranoia, but to liberate you through pattern recognition. Your power is the power of the geologist who understands plate tectonics. You cannot stop the earthquakes, but you know where not to build your house. The quiet, unsettling realization is that breaking free does not lead to a promised land of unassailable autonomy. It leads to a more profound and lonely responsibility. The chains were, in a terrible way, a relief. They bore the weight of your choices. They provided a script, a role, a reason for your suffering. True freedom is the burden of authorship. You must now write your own beliefs, validate your own perceptions, and construct your own meaning from the raw, unmediated data of your life. The invisible war does not end. You simply graduate from pawn to civilian, living in a world where the battlefields are now clear to you, and your only duty is to build a life upon ground you have consciously chosen to occupy. And the final lingering truth is this: you will never not know these things again. The innocence of unquestioning trust is a country to which you can never return. Your awareness is the scar tissue that proves the wound is closed, but its texture will always remind you of the cut. You are free. But you are free in a world you now know is full of invisible currents. You can choose your direction, but you can never again pretend you are not swimming. The door of the cage is open. Beyond it lies not a paradise, but a vast and sobering landscape. And the first long look at that expanse is the real moment of liberation. Terrifying, quiet, and irrevocably yours. Conclusion: mastery of the mind. Understanding is a form of light. But light does not discriminate in what it reveals. It illuminates the path out of the forest, and it also shows you where the traps are laid. It reveals the locks on the doors that confined you, and in that same stark radiance, it reveals the tools with which you could confine others. This is the double-edged nature of the knowledge you now hold. It can be a shield, held up to deflect unseen blows, or it can be hammered into a blade so subtle it leaves no wound, only compliance. The mastery offered is not of others, but of this very choice. To see the machinery of influence is to stand at a permanent crossroads. One path leads to the quiet fortification of the self. Using this understanding to recognize the pressure of a narrative, the hook in a flattery, the artificial scarcity in a demand, here knowledge becomes protection. It allows you to navigate the social world with a quieter pulse, to feel the currents without being swept away. Your awareness becomes a buffer, creating that critical pause between stimulus and response where your authentic will can assert itself. The other path is a descent into a colder climate. It is the temptation to become the architect of those same currents, to move from observed to observer to engineer. The psychological mechanisms laid bare are neutral in their structure. They are levers and pulleys. Their morality is determined solely by the hand on the lever. This is the weight of the responsibility, to know that the very vulnerabilities you have learned to guard in yourself, the need for belonging, the fear of loss, the craving for certainty, are, in others, points of access. To know how to turn a person's own mind against them, and to choose not to. This, then, is the true mastery, the stewardship of your own awareness. It is the conscious daily election to use this light, not as a spotlight to blind others, but as a lamp to see your own footsteps clearly. Power, in its truest psychological sense, is not the capacity to shape another's reality. It is the sovereign authority to guard the sanctity of your own, and the unwavering respect for that sanctity in others. The journey ends not with a technique, but with a question that will now echo in the background of every interaction you have. A question that is your final and only protection. For what purpose? Is this knowledge being used to see or to steer, to understand or to undermine, to build your own boundaries or to subtly dismantle another's? You now live in a world where the invisible is visible. The silent languages of dominance, the architecture of coercion, the ghosts in the machinery of trust, they have all been named. You cannot unsee them. This sight is your burden and your liberation. It means you can never fully return to the innocence of unconscious submission. But it also means you need not remain its subject. The war for the human mind is perpetual. But you are no longer a civilian on that battlefield. You are now aware of the weather, the terrain, and the sound of distant artillery. You have a map. What you do with it, whether you use it to find shelter or to plan an invasion of another's interior world, remains forever your choice. And the light you now possess is the kind that, once seen, casts every shadow, including your own, in stark and permanent relief. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with others who might find it helpful. Your support means everything and helps this channel grow and reach more people. And if you'd like to go even further in supporting the channel, consider joining as a member to get exclusive content and behind-the-scenes insights. Stay curious, stay powerful, and I'll see you in the next one.